Hi, and welcome to another episode of DAWNCast. My name is Cathy Ngo.
And I'm Di Lee.
Today we have a very special guest, Amy Stewart. I used to work with Amy about 10 years ago at IAG.
Wow.
Almost forgot the name. And Amy is a fabulous workshop facilitator. She's in learning and development and emotional intelligence expert. Yes. Yeah. And I'm so excited to bring her on because, like, as we know with the coronavirus and everything, people have become really awful sometimes. So we need to be kind to each other and have more empathy. So thank you so much for joining us today, Amy.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you, Di. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, can't wait to hear about EI. I think emotional intelligence. I remember ages ago when I was at the ABC, and I can't remember, we brought on somebody who wrote emotional intelligence. This was about 15 years ago, and back then no one heard about EI.
Did they eye roll?
Yeah, I think, what the hell is emotional intelligence?
and now it's a big thing, isn't it? Like with the whole, World Economic Forum. I think the study like ages ago or something, they said that by 2020, like that's like one of the top 3 skills. Is that right, Amy?
Absolutely. And then since then, there's been an update gearing more towards 2022, and it still sits within the top 10 leadership skills and skills for the future. So we're positioned really well to be able to really delve into it, unpack it, and let me assure you, I still get the odd eye roll when it comes to all things emotional intelligence as well.
We kind of get the same when we talk about diversity and inclusion, isn't it? It's like,
not another one.
But before we go into emotional intelligence and everything, maybe share us a bit about yourself, what else you're doing during this time and how you're surviving ISO life as well.
Oh, by all means, thank you. So I'll start with my journey, if I may. So a fairly lengthy career in corporate world, I guess we could say, across the financial services and tourism industry. And then in more recent years, I've found myself running 2 companies or businesses. So one of them is gearing very much towards the leadership development, the learning and development, and the organisational development side of things in the Amy Stewart space. And I'm also delighted to be a co-founder of another collaborative called the EI Collaborative, where we solely and wholly focus on, in essence, embracing and amplifying the concepts of EI and human connection and humaning better, as we call it. In terms of how I've been entertaining myself, really good question. So I have a young family at home. I have a just turned 10-year-old and a nearly turning 6-year-old and a husband living within these 4 walls, as we say. My husband's working from the dining room table. I'm working from my office as best I can. Yet we've also had to really rethink how we run our day in, day out lives with little people roaming around, both primary school age, so a mixture of homeschooling, a whole lot of baking, a whole lot of games of lots of cubby house building, jumping on trampoline, and everything else that we can squeeze into a day. So it's keeping us extraordinarily busy, yet also quite connected in terms of just the 4 of us. I can't actually remember, when we probably would have spent time, just the 4 of us, hanging out minute by minute for a really long time.
Mm. So have you found time to bond, gone for long walks, doing exercise together? Because I think I've done it with my son, certainly.
Absolutely. Our son has Red Bull in his veins. So there is not closely followed by his sister, I must admit. So if they're not inside or roaming around outside, there's a whole lot of scootering, a whole lot of bike riding and climbing of trees in the local park, sneaky trips to the park and, not lingering, of course, just expending energy and exercise as best we can. Yeah.
I love that, actually, like going back to basics and climbing trees. That used to be my all-time
I know,
favourite.
Same here. I used to climb trees.
I've fallen a few times. But
that was a long time ago, though. I don't think I've climbed trees since I came to Australia.
I feel like climbing one now.
Amy, so what was it challenging? How challenging was it initially when we all had to kind of been asked to lock down and go into isolation? How did you manage that?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Di. it's a really big question, because we're now quite a few weeks beyond that. To be really honest, those initial few days I would describe from a business perspective as carnage. Being a facilitator and a conference speaker and a keynote speaker, primarily my day in, day out is spent in and around an audience of people, whether it's a small group or a much larger group. So that face-to-face contact was completely, it stopped immediately. There were 4 days of absolute carnage, as I call it, as well as adjusting to what that meant for our family in terms of a safety and wellness capacity. The realities of having to think about when we'll next see our family members. We're going through, at this time of year, we have lots of birthdays and celebrations with our families. And in the generation above us, in my parents' age, and certainly the generation below me, we have some really significant birthdays right now. So I'm craving the opportunity when we all get together and have probably a massive, massive celebration, bigger than potentially what we were going to have initially. Lots of tears, a whole lot of tears. I posted a video or two at the time across the platforms that I'm lucky enough to use around how many tears have been shed, some mammoth meltdowns, and that's not just the kids, that's me as well. Yet also rising to the occasion and thinking about what's going on there and being able to justify some of, I guess, the social neuroscience that's going on in that space around we are humans navigating really unfamiliar territory, and what does that mean for us professionally? What does it mean for us personally? And also from a community perspective. So we've seen, as Catherine said, some really some extraordinary efforts from other human beings, as well as some somewhat disappointing ones. So being able to unpack that, reflect on a lot of those things is the bits and pieces that I'm enjoying right now, and being approached by companies and organisations to come in and share some of these insights is keeping me nicely entertained from a professional perspective, yet also missing some of the community and volunteer work that I get to do as well. So I sit on the fence with how I'm feeling, and it honestly depends on the hour, it depends on the minute.
Yeah.
Overall, though, really consider ourselves lucky to be safe and well right now.
That's a really growth mindset there.
Yeah.
So has your work, I guess, helped you, and I think I know the answer to this, better cope with this situation as well?
Yeah, such a great question. Yes and no, to be really honest. So there's the reason I hesitate there is there's a human side to it that, our brain responds to either reward or threat, as we call it. So an event happens, a conversation happens, a thing is said or done or heard, and that automatically impacts the way our brain processes what's going on there. So in some of those moments, have I been the best version of me? No. In the recovery of those moments, I'd like to think that the opportunity of reflection and capturing what's actually happening from a hormonal perspective and an adrenaline perspective has absolutely empowered me to be able to reflect on it personally, yet also be able to share some of those insights and the realities of us being okay with not being okay. And, all of the conversations and insights that we are able to gain from some of that thinking.
Yeah, a few weeks ago, I think when the start of all this, I created a post that said it's okay to be not okay, because I think that, as you refer to, our brain we went straight into the flight or fight syndrome, and I think a lot of us went into a flight syndrome, lockdown and fear, and I think. I think I received Cathy's email this morning.
Oh yeah,
newsletter, e-letter, and talked about how the process of grieving. You've lost something, you've lost the freedom to really interact and engage with other human beings like you, Amy. I'm constantly out there meeting people. Speaking at events, and so it's Cathy's work. So suddenly that whole
it's evaporated, disappeared
completely
almost
overnight.
Yeah,
and there was a whole grieving process, but I think I didn't have time to grieve that.
Thanks for reading the newsletter, by the way.
Yeah. So there you go.
I don't know if you received it as well, Amy, but I was just basically saying how sorry I was MIA for a little bit. I'm not going to lie, like it's been a really tough time, not just for myself, but for everyone as well. And I just celebrated my son's birthday as well. So he's
How old? How old?
Four. So he's a Taurus like myself. And then on his birthday, I reflected upon the last time I grieved this much, and this is going to sound really bad, but at the time of his birth, because I was grieving the loss of identity, and because he's my first child, loss of identity of being, this very ambitious corporate professional to suddenly now a mum at home, breastfeeding, which feels like 24/7, and then I just grieve the loss of the old me, and then I feel that way now, well, not anymore, but I went through that process a couple of weeks ago, and it's just it's not just me that's feeling this way, it's so many other people as well. I just wanted to share that really quickly.
And so do at that point in time, is your work about calling in that emotional intelligence for us to have that emotional intelligence to really, work things through and understand what's happening and trying to assess the whole scenario. Is that where emotional intelligence can come into play, Amy?
Absolutely can. So there's absolutely layers to it, and just hearing your lovely conversation between the two of you, then such a critical part of how we are able to use our emotional intelligence skills are around the language that we use. So describing our feelings, expanding the vocab that we use around, in this moment, I just feel fine. Well, what do we mean about fine? How can we expand that? So use of words of grief, for example, are real words, or overwhelm, as opposed to I just feel stressed. Now, that's not to say that stress and feeling fine are not okay. They absolutely are. Expanding our vocab is absolutely a critical skill that we work directly with individuals and groups and teams and organisations to build some of that language. The other layers to it, Di, are around the, critical piece is, do we want to define ourselves as emotionally intelligent or not? And it's not so much about that. In fact, it's not really about that as an entire entity. We all are capable of demonstrating emotionally intelligent behaviours. Where do we find the opportunity to demonstrate those, whether it's, again, personally or in the workplace or in the community? And where I love to talk a lot about turning the dial up or turning the volume down. Where can we turn some of the volume up or down on some of that stuff? It's also around genuinely thinking about the impact that I have on myself and those around me. So within those buckets of thinking are key skills around resilience, inspiring others, being authentic, awareness of others as well as self-awareness, which normally sits at number one. How do I make my best decisions when I'm potentially compromised, or where can I remove some of that compromise so I am creating a space where I can and make some of those best decisions. So intertwined in all of that is a whole lot of divine mindfulness and some of the practicing of mindfulness, and those of us who are well entrenched in emotionally intelligent behaviours and being able to share those insights and help skill others up in that space. We are mindfulness practitioners ourselves. Again, are we always the best version of ourselves? Not necessarily. It's normally what happens in those moments after, or on the days after, where we have the opportunity to tap into some of our reflection and thinking in that space as well.
Amy, you mentioned self-awareness. Now, there's a prominent orange leader in the world that does not seem to have self-awareness at all, with really awful hair.
I'm thinking, what orange? What are you talking about? Orange. So suddenly,
Trump. How do leaders, I'm so baffled by, there's so many leaders out there that just you think, wow, what the hell? How did they get there? And Trump is one of those who does not have any filter or self-awareness at all. And we see so many leaders like that. How do you develop self-awareness? I find myself quite self-aware, I think. But how do you develop self-awareness?
Such a great question, and that there is $1 million question in there somewhere, or how long is a piece of string? But it is this extraordinary validity to asking ourselves that question. there's often the case around, are we born with it? Is it something that we can grow? And I truly believe both, based on all of the leaders that I've been lucky enough to work with over many, many years, and not certainly just in the leadership space either. We're talking about individuals. So, critical piece is that people need to have an appetite to grow their own self-awareness, and they've potentially gained some feedback, the powerful word there of feedback, whether they've been provided it without asking, whether they've genuinely gone out and sought some feedback is critical. It's life experiences. It's the opportunity, again, to build some of that reflection. With people such as who you have just mentioned in critical leadership roles across our world, there's often, and he often comes up in our conversations, does someone like that actually have it and they just go about their ways anyway, and therefore leave, some carnage behind them? Or as I often call it, if you're driving a ski boat and you've got some skiers on behind you, are you mindful that those skiers are still on behind the boat even when you're going through some rough patches of choppy water? Or have they fallen off, and are you scooping around to pick them up again, or are you kind of leaving them bobbing in the water? So there's schools of thought in that space as well. We could go on about some of our most prominent leaders across the world right now, the good and the bad and the ugly, of course, yet there's so much more to it around. You might have the strength of self-awareness, then how can we then channel that into the awareness of others, and how I can use that to inspire others and, take some accountability and allow us to have an impact on other people in a positive way, even though the environment that we're operating in may or may not be positive.
I mean, obviously nowadays we have terminologies like EQ and CQ. Those are the qualities that we hear increasingly that leaders should have in order to take organizations or to take society forward. But to get to those, I mean, like EQ is not on, which is emotional intelligence, doesn't operate in isolation. Neither CQ, which is cultural intelligence, doesn't operate in isolation. Or IQ, intelligent, the IQ that we used to be tested for, or people used to be tested for. So, do you find that working in the leadership space, the leaders that you have come across, are many of them equipped with all of these various EQs, CQs, IQs, that you have confidence that they can actually take the organization and to take our society forward?
Oh man, there's so much in that. We need to pour a number of cups of tea or coffee and pursue that one. Again, such a valid question. So again, I'll sit on the fence at a really high level with that sort of question. I'm also lucky enough to work with a whole bunch of graduates moving across a whole bunch of industries. And so from an individual perspective, and then potentially seeing those, wow, you've got there's something in there, there's some talent there, with some phenomenal succession planning, you are going places, and ultimately it's about being a decent human being. We know those decent human beings that walk into our lives, again, professionally or personally, and you start to think about what impact they may or may not be able to have on people now and in the future. There is, there's also another Q that's creeping in more recent times, which is AQ. So the adaptability quotient, and far out, those people, wow. All of us right now, if we are not being encouraged to tap into our adaptability quotient under these circumstances, then we'd be crazy not to be reflecting on some of the thinking in that space. I truly believe that they do not work in silos. There is a beautiful mix of all of them, and those really influential leaders, the ones that have had an impact on our lives. If we think about the best leader that we've ever worked with, for, or around, or the most challenging leader that we've ever worked with, for, or around, normally what we find, in fact, I could almost guarantee what we find, is that those best leaders are the ones who have demonstrated a lot of emotionally intelligent behaviours and skills based around that self-awareness, the awareness of others. Now, they may not be, across all of those gamuts, certainly a bulk of them. And on the flip side, those the most challenging of leaders are probably the ones who are potentially lacking in some of those skill sets. not always a fault of their own either. Maybe they've just never been able to access really quality feedback. Maybe they've been, flying under the radar for a really long time and they haven't been provided with great feedback or haven't given themselves a chance to gain those insights. Tools such as 180-degree feedback, 360-degree feedback gives people a great opportunity to play in that space. And I'm lucky enough, again, to do a lot of work with those sorts of tools. Yet I also truly believe that it's never too late to have really robust conversations around a boardroom table or in a team meeting or around our dinner table where we can really question and, peel away the layers of onion of what's, at the essence of the conversation is quality. And it really comes down to great communication. That's a huge part of it, of course, as well. And the opportunity to hold a mirror up to yourself or wear a different set of sunglasses from time to time when you're looking at the same issue on the table. You could have me talking for hours. I'll hand it back over to you before you have to wind me up.
No, I really like that because you've just eloquently just explained it really well, so it's a really good answer. I just wanted to know, who does it well? If you were to pick a leader that is totally nailing it in emotional intelligence, who would it be?
Yeah, look, I think on more of a global scale, it can be a little bit perception based. So some person, people it's fairly well known that Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, is pretty up there in terms of the demonstrating what we definitely know to be emotionally intelligent behaviours and the skill sets that sit within that from a human perspective, a leadership perspective, and everything else in between. The people who, really stand out for me are those individual leaders who I get to work with. And I won't share the details of them individually, but I'll share some of the insights that I've been gaining in recent weeks. So one particular leader, he heads up an investment firm. It's a global investment firm, but certainly I'm lucky enough to work with him from the Australian arm of things. And he's just a really decent human. He, when I first walked into their building, he made me feel extraordinarily welcome. From the really granular stuff around, are you comfortable there? Have you got everything you need? I'm just about to duck down and grab some coffees. Can I grab you one? As opposed to that traditional type of person who would come in and I'm the CEO, so impress me type stuff. And so obviously I got to meet him in person a few months back, and in recent weeks, I've been invited to run some weekly webinars in what we call sort of an hour of power type stuff. And the invitation from himself and their beautiful HR leader for Australia was around, we're really worried about our guys. We just want them to be entertained. We want them to feel welcome to join a forum that might be in and out or, away from their traditional work day. So are you in a position to pull together some meaty programs? So we've been able to bring those sorts of things to life. He speaks about his people and his people, I use that quite loosely. It's not about the possession piece, in really high regard, yet he also recognises that he has some opportunities and he demonstrates some great vulnerability in the conversations that we've been having. I've seen some really, and I'm sure you both have as well, some really great examples of the written word that have been coming out of late, whether it's a group email to the organisation or the lack of communication that's been coming from some of our leaders. So, those leaders who are truly going out there acknowledging that perhaps we don't know exactly what this looks like, but far out, I'm thinking of you. I'm here. Can you please pick up the phone and ring me? In fact, I'll probably be ringing you over the next couple of weeks as well. So I'd love for you to just sit back and have a chat with me and gain a sense of what's going on. It's absolutely about the other humans. It's about the kindness. It's about the thinking. It's about being okay with not being okay and not always having all of the answers either.
Absolutely.
Yet showing some strength that we can find out the answers together.
And so you don't, I'm just going to put this, how emotional intelligence, the word emotions used to be associated with women so much. Do you think people nowadays are more acceptable of the term and the concept of emotional intelligence and they don't put it down to just, oh, God, this is just about, just for women, emotional intelligence.
Does it still have a branding issue?
I think it again depends on who you ask. And I have, if we go back to that roll of the eyes that we were talking about earlier in the conversation, there's still an element of that. And I think that's just indicative of perhaps a lack of awareness of what we actually mean by it. The fact that emotional is in the title potentially does, beg the question around what do we actually mean by that. So I see it as my job and the work that I'm lucky enough to do, and with the people I'm lucky enough to do this with in the EI space, that our job is to debunk a whole lot of those theories. It's not about, it's okay. It's not just about it's okay for me to cry at work, even though it is. It's about, how people experience us, how whether that's in the workplace, whether that's on the home front, whether that's again in our street. How do they talk about us when we're not in the room? What's the impact of that? What legacy are they leaving on us? That's emotional intelligence. So it's about the emotional side of it, and the intelligence side of it all comes down to the social neuroscience of the brain functioning and how we take in information, how we choose to process that in the moment and after the moment, and then ultimately, again, that the impact that we have on others around us, and how we expand some of that vocab, how we express what we're thinking. Again, I could keep talking. It's absolutely about debunking some of those theories, though, that's for sure.
So what's next for you, Amy? Do you have any plans for the next couple of weeks, or are you just going to kind of just take care of yourself, your family, and just see how it goes, which there's nothing wrong with that as well?
Oh, thank you for asking. It's a mix of all of those, to be really honest. A whole lot more games of lots more baking.
Yes.
I'm now in a possession of a brand new sizable bread baking tin that will enable me to hopefully churn out some really sizable loaves of bread. I'm gluten-free, so it's a kind of a mixture of perfecting whether it was the hot crust buns over over Easter, or whether it's more of the bread that the rest of the family can eat. Watch this space. I'm certainly not doing as much work as I normally would have. That's where my family absolutely takes priority. In New South Wales, our children do return to homeschooling this week, so bracing ourselves for the realities around that, and a huge shout out to our teaching staff who are navigating the realities for just the two little people who live in our house. Obviously, being comfortable with being uncomfortable is something that I have learned big time from running my own business for the last 5 or so years, and being able to tap into that, to know that it's not necessarily going to have all of the answers. Lots more walks, probably a few more sleepless nights. I have been finding myself awake in the middle of the night, but that's when I'm tapping into plenty of those mindfulness and meditation practices at 2 a.m. and a fair bit of journaling and lots of to-do lists. I've set up this beautiful little box where we say, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, or when we get to go and meet so-and-so, we'll do this. So I've created a little kind of post-it note box, and when we think of one of those ideas, this wasn't my idea, by the way, it was someone else's that I stole. We put one of those little notes into the box, and when we are able to be around other people in different sort of capacities, we'll pick one of those notes out perhaps once or twice a weekend and go and make that happen.
Is Wonderful. One of them a big handshake?
I know, the handshake. I was thinking the other day, I think it's been 8 weeks since I've last had a handshake with someone, and I'm one to give feedback on handshakes, the strength of a handshake. I'm a big believer in a decent handshake. Yes. So, and gaining the energy from people in a room, I do know that things will shift, and we won't just go back to, oh, Amy, we need you to go and run a whole host of workshops again. That won't happen quickly. So really jumping into a whole lot of virtual and online and webinars, which I've always done in a significant capacity. Now that's the primary aim of the work that I'm doing.
Well, look, thank you so much for your time, Amy. It's been such a great having a conversation with you around EQ, emotional intelligence. And any, last tips for our audience who, might be going back to work or, working in organisations? What are some of the, 3 tips you would give them in terms of practicing emotional intelligence?
Yeah, it was such another great question. Hard to pick three. In all honesty, is around. You might recall the Maya Angelou quote that I know is quite famous around, how we make people feel, and so honestly, taking a moment to think what I'm saying or doing, how is that having an impact on other people and how they feel? Because we don't forget that. And Maya's quote speaks to that so beautifully. My second point would be absolutely our own self-awareness. And if you just want to pick one thing, I often talk about pick one thing that you can do differently, not 55. Pick up the opportunity and learn one new mindfulness technique. It's extraordinarily healthy for our brain, particularly in these times, to just allow ourselves to be present in the moment. So Google it. There's fabulous apps and a whole lot of tools out there. Subscribe to some great, tools and thought leaders on emotional intelligence, people like Daniel Goleman, Genos International, which is an Australian tool that stemmed out of Swinburne University. GENOS is a great tool. I'd also very much invite you to join us at the EI Collaborative. So it's the eicollaborative.com.au, or Amy Stewart, Learning and Development. And we're putting up videos, we're putting up little bits of memes and toolkits, all free and complimentary during these times to help with your skill set. And ultimately, really enjoy those cups of tea, those chats with people, and the human connection that we can gain. It's a really foreign world out there, and so being connected to another human, even if it's just one, or even if it's a fur baby, please make sure you find those moments to do that.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Amy. So everyone, that was Amy Stewart, and if you've got a story to share, let us know. So my name is Cathy Ngo.
And I'm Di Lee.
Thank you for joining, and don't forget to subscribe. See you later. Was there meant to be an outro?
There was a bunch of music outro.